The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Riley Thorne sat perfectly still in the metal chair, her application folder balanced on her knees. Across the conference table, 3 Navy instructors reviewed her paperwork with expressions that ranged from skeptical to openly dismissive. Commander Hayes flipped through her Army service record without looking up, his weathered fingers pausing at each page just long enough to register disapproval. Before we dive into Riley's story, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Maybe military families are common in your area, or you've witnessed similar determination in your community. The silence stretched until Lieutenant Morrison finally spoke. "Your physical fitness scores are adequate," he said, though his tone suggested adequate fell far short of acceptable. Hayes closed the folder with a sharp snap. "Miss Thorne, the SEAL program demands exceptional candidates. While we appreciate your service, frankly, you don't meet our standards." Riley's jaw tightened, but her voice remained steady. "With respect, sir, you haven't seen what I can do." Morrison exchanged a glance with Hayes, barely suppressing a smirk. "The decision is final," he replied. The rejection felt like a physical blow, but Riley had expected this moment. What they didn't know was that her father had prepared her for far more than they could imagine. 20 years earlier, 80-year-old Riley crouched behind a fallen log in the Montana wilderness, her small hands gripping a modified training rifle. Her father, Gunnery Sergeant Marcus Thorne, knelt beside her, his voice barely above a whisper. "Breathing is everything, sweetheart. Your heartbeat, your breath, they're the enemy of precision." The wind rustled through the pine trees as Riley steadied her aim at the distant target. Marcus had been training her since she could hold a weapon, teaching her secrets that most Marines never learned. "Feel the wind," he murmured. "Don't fight it, use it." Riley exhaled slowly and squeezed the trigger. The distant exploded in a shower of aluminum. "Perfect," Marcus said, pride evident in his weathered face. "But remember, this stays between us. The world isn't ready for what you can do." Riley blinked away the memory as she walked through the Navy base parking lot. The rejection letter crumpled in her fist. Her father's voice echoed in her mind. Marcus Thorne had been a legend among Marine snipers, his record still unbroken 15 years after his death. The instructors who had dismissed her so easily had no idea they were looking at his daughter. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through military forums until she found what she was looking for. Open SEAL demonstration next Friday. Civilians welcome to attempt challenges. Riley's lips curved into a determined smile. Riley spent the next 3 days researching everything about the upcoming demonstration. The event was designed to showcase SEAL training methods to potential recruits and the general public, but participants could volunteer for actual challenges. Most attendees would be curious civilians and wannabe warriors looking for bragging rights. But Riley saw something else entirely, an opportunity to prove herself on their own terms. She drove to the base that Friday morning with butterflies dancing in her stomach. The parking lot was already crowded with pickup trucks and motorcycles, their owners gathering in small groups, sizing each other up like prize fighters before a bout. Riley grabbed her gear bag and walked toward the registration table, ignoring the stares and whispered comments that followed her approach. A burly petty officer looked up from his clipboard as she approached. "Name," he said without enthusiasm. "Riley Thorne," she replied, meeting his skeptical gaze. He scanned his list twice before finding her registration. "You sure you're in the right place, ma'am? This isn't a tour group." The condescension in his voice was unmistakable, but Riley had heard worse. "I'm here to participate," she said firmly. The petty officer shrugged and handed her a waiver form thick enough to stop a bullet. "Sign everywhere that's highlighted," he said. "Hope you brought a good insurance policy." The demonstration area buzzed with testosterone and bravado as Riley surveyed the other participants. Muscle-bound gym rats flexed and postured near the obstacle course, while college athletes stretched and prepared for physical challenges. She counted at least 30 men and only 2 other women, both of whom looked like they belonged at a fitness competition rather than military training. Chief Petty Officer Jake Brennan stepped onto a wooden platform, his imposing frame commanding immediate attention. His cold blue eyes swept across the crowd with practiced authority. "Welcome to a taste of what separates SEALs from ordinary sailors," he announced, his voice carrying easily across the field. "Most of you won't last 30 minutes. Brennan's gaze lingered on Riley with obvious disdain. "We've got some interesting volunteers today," he continued, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "Hope nobody's expecting special treatment because of their gender or delicate sensibilities." Scattered laughter rippled through the crowd as several participants glanced in Riley's direction. She kept her expression neutral, remembering her father's advice about never revealing your emotions to the enemy. Brennan outlined the day's events: obstacle courses, endurance challenges, combat simulations, and finally, marksmanship tests. The last event made Riley's pulse quicken with anticipation. "Let's see who's got what it takes," Brennan declared, jumping down from the platform with theatrical flair. The obstacle course proved to be Riley's first test of endurance and determination. She attacked the rope climb with steady technique, her Army training serving her well as she ascended hand over hand. The monkey bars tested her grip strength, but she powered through each rung with methodical precision. Around her, several participants had already dropped out, nursing pulled muscles and bruised egos. Brennan watched from the sidelines, stopwatch in hand, his expression growing more skeptical with each challenge Riley completed. "She's tougher than she looks," one instructor murmured to another. Brennan's jaw tightened. "Don't get your hopes up," he replied. "This is just the warm-up." The endurance run came next, a grueling 2-meal circuit through sand and obstacles. Riley maintained a steady pace, neither pushing too hard nor falling behind. She finished in the middle of the pack, breathing hard but still standing strong. Several of the muscle-bound participants who had looked so impressive at the start were now bent over, gasping for air. As the group gathered around the next challenge station, Riley caught fragments of whispered conversations. "She's hanging in there better than expected," someone said. Another voice responded, "Wait until the real tests start. She'll crack under pressure like they always do." Riley ignored the commentary, focusing instead on conserving energy for what lay ahead. The marksmanship range was still hours away. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the marksmanship range as the remaining participants gathered around the firing line. Only 15 candidates had survived the morning's physical challenges, and Riley could feel the weight of their collective doubt pressing down on her shoulders. The targets stood at various distances, from basic 50-yard bullseyes to challenging long-range silhouettes that would test even experienced marksmen. Brennan held up a standard-issue rifle, his voice carrying the authority of years of training. "This is where we separate the pretenders from the real deal," he announced. "You'll have 3 attempts at each target distance. Most civilians can't hit the broadside of a barn, so don't be embarrassed when you miss." The first volunteer stepped forward, a former college football player named Derek who had dominated the obstacle course. His shots rang out across the range, striking close to the target center but falling short of precision. "Good enough for weekend hunting," Brennan commented with grudging approval. One by one, participants took their turns. Some managed respectable groupings at close range, while others struggled to hit the targets at all. A few quit after their first attempt, intimidated by the pressure and public scrutiny. Riley watched each shooter carefully, analyzing their stance, breathing, and trigger discipline. Her father's training had taught her that observation was just as important as execution. Finally, only Riley remained. Riley stepped to the firing line with deliberate calm, her hands steady as she accepted the rifle for Brennan. The weight felt familiar in her grip, like reuniting with an old friend. She checked the weapon with practiced efficiency, her movements drawing curious glances from the watching instructors. "Someone knows what they're doing with that rifle," muttered Sergeant Torres, an older instructor with 3 decades of experience. Brennan waved dismissively. "Basic Army training, nothing more." Riley assumed her firing position, the familiar stance her father had drilled into her countless times. The 50-yard target wavered slightly in the afternoon breeze, but she could read the wind patterns like a favorite book. Her first shot cracked across the range, striking just outside the bullseye. Close, but not exceptional. The crowd murmured with mild approval as she fired her second shot, this one closer to center, but still unremarkable. Brennan crossed his arms, his expression smug. See, he called out loud enough for everyone to hear, decent at close range, but nothing special. Riley blocked out his voice and focused on the target. Her third shot punched through the exact center of the bullseye, earning a few scattered claps from the spectators. Better, Torres admitted, though his tone suggested he'd seen similar accuracy before. Now for the real test, Brennan announced, gesturing toward the 100-yard targets. This is where amateurs fall apart. The 100-yard targets presented a significantly greater challenge, their bullseyes appearing as small dark circles through the rifle's iron sights. Riley adjusted her stance, feeling the wind shift direction as clouds moved across the sun. She drew on every lesson her father had taught her about reading environmental conditions and compensating for distance. Her first shot at the extended range struck dead center, punching through the bullseye with satisfying precision. A hush fell over the small crowd as they processed what they had just witnessed. That was no lucky shot, Torres whispered to another instructor, his weathered face showing the first signs of genuine interest. Brennan's confident smirk faltered slightly, but he maintained his dismissive tone. One good shot doesn't make a sniper, he declared, though his voice carried less conviction than before. Let's see if she can do it again. Riley's second shot followed the same trajectory as the first, creating a tight grouping that would impress even seasoned marksmen. The spectators began paying closer attention, their casual conversations dying away as they focused on her performance. Even some of the failed participants had stopped nursing their wounded pride long enough to watch. Instead of acknowledging her skill, Brennan grew visibly frustrated. He strode to the target control station and began setting up the most challenging scenarios available. 200 yards, he announced with barely concealed irritation. Moving targets. Let's see how special you really are. The mechanical whir of the moving target system filled the air as Riley prepared for the 200-yard challenge. The targets swayed unpredictably on their tracks, simulating combat conditions that would challenge even veteran snipers. She closed her eyes momentarily, hearing her father's voice from years past. Anticipate the movement, don't chase it. Her first shot at the moving target struck center mass, stopping conversations mid-sentence across the range. The second followed with identical precision, then the third. Each bullet found its mark with mathematical certainty, defying the increasing wind and the target's erratic patterns. By the fifth consecutive bullseye, complete silence had settled over the demonstration area. Instructors who had been casually observing other activities now stood transfixed, watching Riley operate with mechanical perfection. Torres pulled out binoculars to confirm what his naked eyes could barely believe. 10 perfect shots, then 11. 12. The impossible was becoming routine under Riley's steady hands. Brennan's face had gone from smug confidence to pale disbelief as he realized he was witnessing something far beyond ordinary marksmanship. She's not missing, someone whispered in awe. How is she not missing? When Riley completed her 15th consecutive bullseye at maximum difficulty, the silence became deafening. Even the wind seemed to pause in respect for what had just occurred. Brennan stood frozen at the control station, his finger hovering over switches he no longer dared to activate. Brennan's hands trembled slightly as he activated the range's most extreme challenge setting. 300 yards, he announced, his voice barely above a whisper. Multiple moving targets. Crosswinds at 15 knots. This is what we use to test our most elite snipers. The targets began their complex dance at the far end of the range, tiny silhouettes weaving unpredictable patterns through the gusting wind. Riley felt the familiar calm settle over her like a comfortable blanket. This was the moment her father had prepared her for, though he could never have imagined the circumstances. She thought of Marcus Thorne as she steadied her breathing, remembering his gentle hands guiding hers on that first rifle so many years ago. Feel the shot before you take it, sweetheart. Trust your instincts. The first target fell to her bullet with surgical precision. The second, the third. Each shot required split-second calculations of wind drift, target movement, and bullet drop that would challenge a computer. Yet Riley executed them with fluid grace. Torres lowered his binoculars with shaking hands. "I've never seen anything like this," he whispered to the instructor beside him. "Not in 30 years of training snipers." By the 10th perfect shot at impossible range and conditions, several spectators were pulling out phones to record what they instinctively knew was history in the making. Riley continued her methodical destruction of targets, each bullet finding its mark despite conditions that should have made accuracy impossible. The 15th and final shot echoed across the range like thunder, followed by a silence so profound it seemed to swallow sound itself. Riley lowered the rifle slowly, her breathing steady despite the magnitude of what she had just accomplished. Every target bore the precise signature of her marksmanship, 15 perfect bullseyes under conditions that would challenge Olympic shooters. Torres was the first to break the spell, walking toward Riley with measured steps and an expression of profound respect. "Ma'am," he said, his voice carrying 3 decades of authority, "I need to ask you something. What's your father's name?" Riley met his gaze without hesitation. "Gunnery Sergeant Marcus Thorne, 1st Marine Division." The color drained from Torres' weathered face as recognition dawned. "Holy hell," he whispered, then caught himself. "I served with your father in Afghanistan. He saved my unit with a shot nobody believed was possible. We called him the Ghost of Helmand Province." Murmurs rippled through the crowd as Torres' words sank in. Brennan stood motionless, his earlier arrogance replaced by something approaching awe. The other instructors gathered closer, their skepticism transformed into professional curiosity and dawning respect. "I thought Marcus Thorne was a legend," someone said softly. "He was," Torres replied, his eyes never leaving Riley. "And apparently, so is his daughter." Riley felt tears threatening but held them back, knowing her father would have been proud of this moment. Within an hour, word of Riley's performance had reached the base commander. Captain Rebecca Walsh arrived at the range personally, her measured steps and stern expression commanding immediate attention from everyone present. She examined the targets with methodical precision, confirming what the witnesses could barely believe. "Miss Thorne," Walsh said, turning to face Riley with newfound respect, "I owe you an apology. We made assumptions based on outdated prejudices rather than recognizing exceptional talent. That ends today." Torres stepped forward, his voice carrying conviction earned through decades of service. "Captain, I've trained thousands of marksmen. What I witnessed today surpasses anything I've seen in my career. This woman belongs in our program." Brennan, his earlier hostility replaced by genuine admiration, approached Riley with an extended hand. "I was wrong about you," he said simply. "Dead wrong. Your father would be proud of what you accomplished here today." Walsh pulled out her phone and made a brief call. Within minutes, official paperwork was being prepared to overturn Riley's previous rejection. The SEAL training program had a new candidate, one whose abilities had been proven under the most demanding circumstances imaginable. If this story moved you, share your thoughts about your favorite moment or character, or tell us about someone you know who showed similar hidden strength when others doubted them. As Riley signed her acceptance papers, she felt her father's presence somehow watching over her shoulder, his legacy finally receiving the recognition it deserved.